Hello everyone, my name is Diego and I'm super excited to be here with Cara and Adina. We're going to be talking about sex today, which I think is a pretty prevalent topic given that this month is Pride Month. So we can talk about the intersectionality between sex and disability. So why don't you start us off, Cara? What do you see as the intersection between pride and disability?
Between pride and disability or sex and disability?
Between sex and disability, yeah, but I guess considering it's Pride Month, you know, what similarities and differences do you see between the Pride movement of the LGBT community versus the Pride movement of the disability community?
Well, I think the pride movement of the LGBT community is much more prevalent, but I think we have to be careful not to split that into a binary, like on one side is LGBT, on one side is disability, because obviously there are LGBTQIA disabled people. I'm one of them. I identify as asexual, which comes with its own stereotypes.
So for people that don't know, what is asexual?
Asexual means that I don't feel much, if any, sexual attraction to people. Sex is just not really on my radar, which is hilariously ironic since I'm sitting here making a video about sex.
But it's important to note, while there are asexual disabled people, that doesn't mean that because you have a disability you're asexual.
Yes,
I think that's a very important point.
Which I was going to get to, which is why when talking about the stereotype that disabled people aren't sexual and don't have sex, I prefer to use the term non-sexual in order to avoid confusion with the asexual community. And that is a big myth and a big stereotype that we need to smash, because disabled people span the gamut of sexualities, including asexuality.
So, why do you think that is? Why do you think there are so many misconceptions about disability and sexuality?
Well, I think that a lot of people think that if you're in a wheelchair or if you use a cane, you're functionally an old person, and you're not sexy. Like,
Yes.
And that's frustrating because I think I'm sexy, and I have a disability. So,
but I also think it has to do with like how the media portrays disability and even like the porn industry. I mean, okay, so I think, you know, when you're looking at, you know, the sex industry and like when you are having discussions about sex, there's never a conversation and there's never like the imagery of disability. In sex ed, you know, people don't even talk, they're starting to talk about, you know, the LGBT community, but they don't even talk about disability and what that means. And so I remember growing up and seeing all these different things. Maybe this is too much information to share, but I remember my friend was talking about, we were like 16 or something, and we had an older friend who was talking about his first few times like watching porn and stuff like that. And I just remember having a conversation and being like, and in my head thinking like, oh, that's interesting, but like, how is that gonna be possible with me having a disability? Like, how's even sex gonna be possible? Mm-hmm. I think parents don't even want to have that conversation.
As someone who uses a wheelchair, are people very nosy about you know, whether your parts work or something like that?
Surprisingly, not really. I mean, I know that other people have gotten a lot of nosy questions about sex and whether they can have sex and whether they have had sex. For me, I haven't really gotten any of those. I mean, I've gotten plenty of other weird comments and questions throughout my life. That's one I've never really gotten, but I think that's just more a function of luck than anything.
I would honestly prefer that people are nosy, because that's assuming that they at least have the curiosity to learn and they want to understand, you know, and they don't necessarily see disabled people as not sexual. They just want to understand how that works.
And really, it worked the same as anybody else, with a few adaptations?
I don't know. I mean, I was with my girlfriend who also has a physical disability, and I've been with non-disabled. You know, I've been with non-disabled people and disabled people, and there's definitely something to say about when you mix two disabled people together, right? There are definitely some physical restraints,
Well,
but I think talking about that and like and not letting that be a taboo, and I think also it allows us to be more creative because you have to explore other areas and other opportunities that you might not explore with a non-disabled person. So it's a win-win for all.
I mean, even with me, and like sex is a very important part of my life. Like I think a lot of people, it's a very important part of their life. But with me, when my chronic fatigue is really bad, like I'm not fun to have sex with because like I don't have the energy to move at all. And but like it's still being in a long-term relationship, that's still like having a regular sex life is still a part of my life even when I'm having really bad fatigue. But it's really hard on my partner because like he knows how excitable I could be, and like to see me like that is just not as,
not to be repetitive, but exciting.
Yeah.
I mean, I think the takeaway from this is really to encourage other disabled people to share their sex stories and to bring those perspectives into the conversation, because the more we do, the less taboo there's gonna be.
And it's starting to happen. It really is starting to happen. There's starting to be a real sex and sexuality movement within the disability community. Back in the fall, I presented at a sexuality and disability conference at Wright State University in Ohio. There are some great disabled people doing great sex and sexuality work. Bethany Stevens, Eva Sweeney, Andrew Morrison Gurza, all incredible sex and disability activists. So it's starting to happen, and I'm glad to see it's happening. But what I see happening sometimes is we put so much emphasis on the fact that disabled people have sex that it ends up excluding those of us who don't have sex. So if we could just keep the conversation open and remember that we all have a wide range of sexual experiences and sexual feelings, I think we could have some really valuable conversations.
Yeah. I think the main point that I see is just encouraging people to open the conversation, right? But also when you have, the DC Center, that's like the LGBT Resource Center for the city, right? Making sure that there are disabled people represented in this conversation.
Also, I think it's important to note that there are conditions in the neurodivergent community that make sex even more fun, like with hypersexuality and stuff like that. So like that's part of our community too.
Yeah.
And I mean there's good and bad in that, but like there's good and bad in everything, and sex is fun for so yeah.
So cool. I would encourage everyone who's watching this video to comment down with a sexy sex story. And I think that could be the hashtag. Hashtag sexy sex story.
Sexy sex story, I like it.
Cool. Thanks for watching.
Woo!
Bye.